Hello Internet, Seth Skorkowski, and periodically I like to do a list video, the 5 worst players, or 7 Game Master sins, that sort of thing, where we rapid fire through several bad behaviors that can spoil the game, often accompanied with a silly skit or something like that. I don't do those videos as much as I used to, but that's still not stopped me from compiling certain lists in my notes of different types of behaviors, with vague plans of, doing them in some future video. I have got tons and tons of these lists compiled. And I was working on one which was about player behaviors that just drive me bats, but aren't deal breakers. Little things that don't ruin the game or anything, but do make me just want to bang my head against the table. Basically, it's all the things my own players do. And while I was assembling this particular list, one of those items really stuck out to me. And it's something that, while in my own situation isn't actually that bad, it's a low enough amount that it wouldn't really ruin the game or split the group up or anything, it is something that, if done in larger amounts or with the wrong intentions, can really be terrible or simply be a signs of larger problems that are going on in the group. And that's not saying what you want. Okay, let me start off by showing the innocent yet maddening way this has popped up in my own games. And this is how I was originally going to frame this topic in a list video before I started contemplating it a bit more. After days on the road, your characters arrive at a small village at the mouth of the river. Cool! What's this building? That's a carpenter's home. And this one? That's a general store, like a mercantile. What's this one here? That's a tavern. You can hear some music coming out of it and some kind of raised voices of people laughing. Huh. How about this one? Blacksmiths. What's this one? What's this one? It's a butcher's shop. You can see different skinned carcasses hanging in the window. And this one? Baker. You can smell pies that are cooling behind a barred window. Huh. What's this one? Candlestick maker. You can see candles in the window. Okay, last one. What's this? That one's a glassblower studio. Dang it, I was hoping for a Boyer Fletcher so I could get some arrows. Why didn't you just say that to begin with? Okay, so let's break this one down. A player walks into a town and asks what each and every building is, forcing their game master to come up with all of these answers, and then to only then, at the very end, express that all they really wanted was a specific type of shop. And so now we've wasted all this time for everyone that's sitting around the table, and our game master has used up a significant chunk of their mental energy on nothing useful, and the player didn't get what they wanted, so no one in the end is happy with that. Now, was there a problem with the player asking what all the buildings in the town were? No, not at all. I talked about in my review of it, but when I ran The Secret of Bone Hill, I gave my players a map and they had to walk around this town to discover what each building was and then note that down. And that was because we were going to be doing a long-running campaign there, but that was a case where they did have to explore that town where everything was already decided out beforehand. However, towns where I already know what everything is in advance, those are super rare for me to do. Most of the time, I have no idea what most of the buildings are, so if a player walks into a town and says, "Is there a Boyer Fletcher in this town? Because I need some arrows," I'm almost certainly going to say, "Oh yeah, it's right here," because that's what the player wants. Unless I have some reason not to have something there that they want, I'm going to say that sure, it's this building right here. So the player's chances of getting what they want are far greater if they simply state to me what it is that they want. But even if what the player wants isn't available or isn't available yet, I can right away tell them that it isn't there. So now the rest of the table has saved all this time, and I've saved all this time, and none of us have to go through playing 50 questions first before the player gets to know if they're going to be able to get what it is that they're looking for. Now, sometimes the player has no idea what they want. They're just asking questions. Maybe they're curious, or maybe they're simply thinking out loud, trying to formulate their thoughts, or see if the game master presents something that inspires them and gives them a good idea. And that is perfectly fine. I encourage that even. If a player isn't looking for anything in particular and asks, "What's this building here?" and the game master says, "Well, that's a glassblower's shop," and the player says, "Oh wow, that gives me the idea. I could use a glass blower to make some glass arrows and I could fill them with, potions or acid or something like that," then great. I'm happy that my, just mentioning that as a game master inspired something. So there was no sin with the player simply asking questions, especially if they're not looking for anything in particular. But players, if there is something specific that you want, just come out and say it. If your character's in a library, don't ask your game master to name every single book in the place when the question that you really wanted to ask ask is there a dictionary in here? If that's what you want, simply ask it. Don't run your game master through some sort of gauntlet of trying to answer a bunch of questions like a pop quiz, only to get it wrong because you're wanting them to name some specific and random thing that they might not think of. As I said, this really is just a teeny minor issue. At least in my group, it just drives me freaking bats. So players, if there is something that you want, please just come out and say it. Worst case scenario is the answer is no, but you're getting your chance of getting what you want are exponentially higher if your game master knows what it is that you want, rather than them trying to just randomly guess it without knowing that you even want anything. Your game master is not a mind reader, or at least I'm not a mind reader. Maybe there are some game masters out there who are. That'd be pretty awesome. Now, game masters, even if you are not a mind reader, very often you can tell when a player is looking for something specific. And when you get that sense that they are, just simply ask them. If you have an arms dealer that opens up the back of their van and says, check out my collection of fine stolen weaponry, and the player asks, well, what does he have? Just cut to the meat of what they really want by asking, is there something that you're looking for? That can prevent a lot of headache for you and a lot of heartbreak for them, because now both of you got what you wanted and the game can keep moving forward rather than grinding to a halt as we're listing out 20 answers trying to guess whichever weapon it is that that player is thinking of and hoping you'll get it right. Now, sometimes it might not be immediately clear that the player is looking for something specific. It might feel, kind of like they're asking normal questions that are totally reasonable, or they're going through some totally normal, reasonable tasks, and you don't realize that they're actually hoping for some specific result until you're already pretty deep into it. So don't be afraid to ask them, what are you looking for? Or what is it your character's trying to do? What is it that you really want? Sometimes the player might be trying to do something and they're overcomplicating it or making it more difficult for themselves by not simply stating aloud what their end goal is. Like they might be approaching it, one small step at a time and needlessly making it more complicated than it needs to be. An example of this is when we first started playing Traveler. We were all new to that game. I had run a single session of it, and this was our second adventure that I was running. And then one of the players, this was his very first adventure of this game because he had missed that first one. So none of us were remotely proficient in this game system yet. We're kind of still trying to figure it all out. Now, the player characters were trying to collect this bounty on this big mobster guy, and he was staying at some sort of high-end resort, sort of a safari resort that was on a backwater planet. The player characters learned that the target was in the bar at the time with his bodyguard, so one of the players walks into the bar, and instead of asking about the target or the bodyguard, he completely ignores them, and all he asked about was, who else is in this bar? So I described a few tables that have other patrons at them. He approaches one, he gets into a game of poker, and he gets into all these conversations, and he's making a lot of rolls, some gambling checks, persuade checks, and I think even some deception. But I have no idea where he's going with this. We're just role-playing and having fun with it. Eventually, though, the player fails a roll, and by fail, I mean he bombed this roll. It was spectacular. He ends up getting spotted by the bad guys, is getting tossed out of the bar, and it was at that point the player, who was frustrated because of how it turned out, he went ahead and said aloud that he was just trying to get himself, kind of worked in to be comfortable with the other guests, that way he could gather some rumors about this mobster regarding his habits and get any sort of juicy details that they could use in order to snag this guy. And I said, dude, there is a skill for that. It's called carouse, and his character had a good carouse skill. Now, the player was new to the game. This was his first session of it. I don't blame him at all for not understanding what that skill did, but had he just simply said, this is the end goal that I want from this scene, we could have resolved all of this in 1, maybe 2 skill rolls instead of doing 5 skill rolls, because requiring any more rolls to do any specific task is really just improving your chances of failing that task. So, fewer rolls, better chance of success overall. And had I just known that's what it was, I would have asked for a completely different type of roll. Now, that situation where the player not stating what their goal is can hurt the game and can hurt everyone's good time. But again, this wasn't a case at all that it wasn't intentional. It was just a case that the player didn't tell me what it was that they wanted. However, sometimes though, it is intentional when a player is trying to hide their overall goal from the game master until we have some sort of big reveal, those aha moments that are really popular as tabletop stories. People love hearing these things. One that's made the rounds for some time deals with a player attaching a ring of magic cancellation to the end of their flintlock rifle and then shrinking a bunch of cannonballs down. So now when they shoot the gun, the cannonball goes through the ring and out the end of the barrel and turns into a full-size cannonball that's now flying towards their target. I don't know if that's a true story or not. It doesn't really matter. I hope it is, because I think it's a really interesting concept that, and I like the idea that a player kind of thinking outside the box. But normally when stories like that are framed, it's treated more like it's an aha moment, like they pulled something over on the game master by getting the game master to agree to several small requests without telling them what the overall plan was. And that's when I hate stories like that. And the reason for that is intent. Honest mistakes are one thing, but doing it with intent is a very different matter entirely. This makes it adversarial, which falls into those player versus game master issues that I've warned about in other videos before. And an adversarial player in regards like this is probably due to one of two causes. First is that the player knew that they were going to be attempting something that shouldn't work. They know they're going against the spirit of the game, so they're trying to work the system, getting these small things one by one until it's too late for the game master to say no, and now it ends up becoming some sort of issue because the game master either has to agree to it or they can say no and it leads to some sort of argument. For me, this pulls it from being a neat idea of, let's see if this works, into a player versus a game master issue. Now, I love it when players think outside the box. Sometime back, a couple years ago, I did a video, and it is a really weird video, where the surface topic is a debate about Kirk versus Picard. But the main plot of the video that's going on at the same time is one of the players is devising a creative way to make a shaped charge using different spells, so the characters can escape a room that they're sealed into. Now, that was a gag that one of my players did and told me about with his other game masters, a guy named Jeff, and I always thought it was a really clever idea. But the key difference between that skit and an aha moment is when the player is laying out their plan to the game master of combining these different spells, and that's when he asks, will that work? And that's when he hands that decision over to the game master to make. I have devised this creative way to combine these spells for this result that I want. Will that work? And now the game master gets to decide if it will. Now, that's not the same as this celebrated meme of a player using the same type of creative thinking to pull one over on their game master. And players who try to conceal their plans so they can pull one over on the game master, those groups aren't usually known to last very long. And the second possible reason for a player that might conceal what their intentions are from the game master is because that player believes that the game master is being adversarial and isn't going to let them have it. Not because the player is wanting, something that's bad or something that's game-breaking, but it's because the game master doesn't want them to succeed. So, if they walk into a town, they're not going to straight up ask, is there a Boyer Fletcher here? Because that player believes that the game master is going to say no simply because the player wants something. And if the game master is doing that, they're getting off on just refusing whatever it is that the players want. That is a serious problem. So either the game master is a problem GM and they're just being a dick, or the player is under the impression that their game master is a dick game master, and now they're kind of reacting to it preemptively, trying to hide their intentions, that way the game master, doesn't try to keep anything from them. So even if the game master is doing something wrong, or the player just perceives that they're doing something wrong, the results are going to be the same, and that is not the formula for a healthy group. It is a much bigger issue that definitely needs to be addressed among the players. Once again, pretty much any of these videos like this just come down to needing to have communication in your group as a key if you want that group to succeed and last a long time. Now, so far, all that I've talked about is small chunks, a player needing to announce what it is that they want within a session or within a single scene. And that was the original topic that I wanted to address when I was thinking about using this for just a list video. However, once I started thinking about it a bit more, I realized that, the same holds true for larger things, such as full adventures or full campaigns. If you lurk on boards and chat groups long enough, or even some of the comments in my other videos on this channel, you'll see players that are lamenting about how they wish that their game master would give them more combat or less combat, or run a mystery or run a horror adventure, send them to some special locale like the Underdark or the Frozen Wastes, or some of their larger scale desire. Whenever I see that, my first thought is, have you said that to your game master? Just from my personal experience here, a lot of players might talk amongst themselves about different things that they'd like to have in the game or they don't want to have in the game, but they don't mention this to the game master. And the more time that passes, the longer they're playing together, the more those players get frustrated about not getting whatever it is that they want. And the biggest problem is that none of them told their game master about it or expressed how important it was to their game master until it had already become a much bigger issue. Now, maybe they did tell their game master about it once. Maybe they mentioned it a long time back, during their session 0, and since then their game master hasn't offered that to them. Maybe that was intentional that they haven't done that, or maybe not. So go ahead and remind your game master. I, for one, am highly skilled at forgetting things, so if your game master hasn't given you whatever it is you've requested, just a friendly reminder can go a long way. Just be sure that you're making it clear to your game master that this is a request. I'm also really skilled at missing subtlety. Finally, while we've only focused on players in this video, game masters often have trouble with this as well. There are probably things that the game master wants in the game, but they never ever state them to their players, and then they get frustrated when the game master never gets whatever it is that they want, and they're like, why am I running all this games if it's not going to be what I want it to be? Now, from a game master's side, this works pretty differently than it works from a player's side. If there is some sort of action that the game master wants the players to do during a session, it's probably not a good idea just to outright tell them that, this is what they have to do. And that's where we get into that aspect of, railroading and taking away the player's choice, and we don't want to take away the player's choice here, so the game master has to approach this one very, very differently. Normally in a game masters are limited to offering hooks and obstacles if we want the player characters to do something. For them to leave the city and head west down the road, we give the characters a hook, like a quest or a hot tip of something desirable that's that direction. We might even place visible obstacles at the other direction so the characters know more options that would be more difficult if they go another way. Such as the front of the fortress is heavily guarded, but in the back there's a tree that leads up to a third floor balcony window. And when the players, once they have that information, they can decide and they can weigh it and decide what their actions are. You shouldn't just state as a game master, I want you to climb that tree. No, you still have to give them the choices, and you can't tell them outright what it is that you want them to do. But at the same time, if there is something that a game master wants their players to do, and they don't provide any hooks or obstacles in order to relay that or help influence their decisions, they're just kind of hoping that the players randomly guess whatever course of action that the game master wants, then they shouldn't be surprised when the players don't do whatever it is that the game master wants. Just be aware that while you're not a mind reader, neither are your players. Presumably. I have my suspicions. So game masters are much more limited in being able to announce what it is that they want during a game session itself. But between the game sessions, or during that pre-campaign session 0 period, they can and they should state what it is that they want to the players. If you're wanting a certain type of character, like pirates, or have them be capable of certain skills, or have some sort of personality traits in common, like, they might be outlaws, but they're also heroic good guys, or they're more inclined to con and sneak their way past obstacles than, charge in with guns blazing. If you have something like that, you need to state that to your players up front. Don't expect your players just to magically guess whatever it is that you want. I talked about my videos on running mysteries and horror games that one of the keys to getting the most out of those type of games is to be upfront and let your players know what sort of theme it is that you're going for. And most of the time, if the players know what that desired result is, they're going to actively help and try to helping you achieve that and getting everybody that sort of result. Again, this is very different when a player announces whatever it is that they want. Game masters, it's a very different role. You can't do everything the same way that they can. So this becomes more suited to do at a different time and place than during the game session itself. But most people, especially in a healthy gaming group, are going to try to accommodate what the other participants around the table want, as long as it's not only presented them in a way that they're even aware of it in the first place, but also presented to them in an appropriate way. And once the game master knows what the players want, the players know what the game master wants, we can save a lot of time and frustration of fumbling around trying to guess the correct answer. We can spend more time playing and more time having fun. Once again, it all comes down to communication between everyone around the table. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews or how-tos or more RPG philosophy, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, amigos, stay awesome. I think I figured out which gun I want my character to have. Okay, well, the arms dealer nods. So what's your pleasure? I want a gun that can't miss. And now that you know what I want, I think I'm going to find it here. Hey, none of my guns miss. They're the best quality. They will always hit exactly what you point them at. The real question here is how good are you at shooting, huh? Dang, there's always a catch.